use in ballroom dancing would be the use of the legs and the feet. And we have 4 joints through the leg, main one being the hip joint, then the knee joint, which is very important, the ankle, and finally the toes. And the first one that I'm going to talk about really is the use of the knee. And this produces the first initial movement forward of the body. So in order to move the body, we're not just moving the body weight forward, but we're compressing the knee forward, which in turn is moving the weight forward. Now the trick to producing a very powerful action is to keep the heel of the supporting foot on the floor as long as possible. So you can see as I'm flexing the knee forward, the heel is staying on the floor, and it will produce quite a powerful looking action. If I could show you that once again, and I release the heel a little bit early from the floor, that unbalances the body and looks a very weak action. Now, when I describe the technique that we're using, I'm going to mention the bones as well as the joints. And we have a shin bone at the front of the lower part of the leg here, and I really try to move that shin bone forward relative to the foot, and actually we can flex the knee forward, I always say, to a maximum of about 44 degrees, and that would leave an angle between the foot and the shin of about 46, and that is the maximum that we would ever use. And we try to get fairly close to that on some of the very powerful compressions that we use, but we don't have to do that maximum at all times. So that is producing the knee action first to produce the first step. Now it's also important for me to describe what the other leg is doing while we are compressing the standing leg. And at this point, if I had danced just a small preparation step, I am actually delaying the foot moving forward. So in actual fact, we prepare the first step by lifting the knee. As the standing leg knee is flexing, we lift the other one, and eventually the foot is caused to catch the body. So actually we can call these initial steps the first steps of many of the bars of music that we dance. They are the leading steps, and they are like a catch step. They are actually catching the body. They don't arrive before the body, which would tend to make the movement rather heavy. The weight ends slightly between the feet before we transfer. So the moving leg, the knee is lifting, and eventually the weight unbalances from the supporting foot, and we then move on to the new foot, now being the right foot. Now I'm going to describe the footwork, because at this point now the footwork comes into play, and we have to use heel-toe footwork. Before we show you that, having placed the first step, I'm now going to start to use heel-toe footwork through the right foot, swing the left foot to the side onto the toe, and finally I can turn, make the final turn, closing the feet at the end of 3, and that would complete the natural turn. So very important once again to make sure that we are using the heel-toe foot action, the footwork, before we place the second step onto the toe. So if I just show you that one more time, compressing the standing leg, allowing the moving leg to move forward, the heel-toe foot action, and then placing the left foot to the side, and finally closing the feet and lowering at the end of 3. You'll also see that we produce a hip action. We can really call this swing, particularly on a natural turn. We produce quite a big swing, and this is coming through the hip. So without going into great detail about the hip, or the swing, I'll just show you really what we feel, or when we feel the hip is starting to be really worked. At this point, I'm keeping the hips just moving forward, but before I place the left foot to the side, I start to use the big muscles of the body to pick up the hip and swing it forward, and that starts the elevation, really the full elevation, and then finally the feet will close and lower. So the main action through the hip is occurring on the second beat to produce the swing from the end of 1 to 2, and then just finally allowing the swing to continue to close the feet at the end of 3. When we start to produce that closing action, we use very much the big muscles on the inside of the leg, which feel as though they're rather pulling up and together to finally close the feet. So very very strong muscles through particularly the top of the leg, which first close the top of the leg, then finally closing through the knee, and the final close would be through the ankle and then the toes to the toes. So full use of the inside muscles, and to close the feet will produce a very nice closing action at the end of the natural turn. I'd like to show you that on a different direction. You may be able to see the closing of the legs a little bit easier. So if we're going in this direction, still compressing the knee forward, causing the moving leg to be placed, then the big swing through the hip, and finally the pulling up of the muscles from the top of the leg, the knees closing, the feet closing, and then finally the lowering action. When we change from one bar of music to the next, the lowering action is very, very important. We must lower through the closing foot. First, we must lower the heel to the floor, and then we begin to move the body to cause the next step to be taken. So very important to make sure that the heel of the closing foot, in this case the closing foot is the right foot of course, and we close and lower that heel to the floor, very, very important, and then we can begin to move the body weight back to prepare the next step. So that's our change really from one bar of music to the other.